There's no agenda updates. With that, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, and I think she had a quick comment before we take the roll call. Clerk McCall.
Thank you, everybody. I just wanted to address the board and the members of the Winnebago County. I want to express my gratitude and appreciation for how you guys have outreach to me and accepted me. And no matter what I needed, you guys were always readily available for me as my time as the first African American Winnebago County clerk. Yes. Thoroughly enjoyed my time, and the clerk's office has run tremendously thanks to the staff that's there and all of you guys. Without all of you guys, it's just been a great honor to serve the county of Winnebago. And I just want to express my thank you today, my last meeting, and that's it. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll call the roll.
Stay tuned.
Mr. Biondo.
Present.
Mr. Booker.
Present.
Mr. Boomer.
Here.
Mrs. Crosby.
Here.
Mr. Fellers.
Here.
Mr. Fiducia.
Here.
Mr. Girl.
Yes, present.
Mrs. Gora.
Present.
Mr. Hoffman.
Present.
Mr. Jury.
Present for the last time.
For the last. Mr. Kelly. Mr. McDonald.
Present.
Mr. Nicolosi.
Here.
Mrs. Red.
Present.
Mr. Salgado.
Present.
Mr. Schultz.
Here.
Mr. Sassoni.
Present.
Mr. Webster.
Here.
Mr. Westcott.
Present.
And Mr. Wilson.
Present.
We have 19 present and 1 absent.
Thank you very much. With that, I will turn things over to Mr. Boomer and ask everybody to stand for the prayer and pledge. Mr. Boomer.
Lord, I'd ask for your guidance to help us make the right decisions for the future of our county. Help us grow more together than apart. Only with your help can we prosper. Watch over all of us. In your name, amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. And with that, we have a little bit of special recognition. I'd like to welcome Senator Stottleman, who is here this evening to recognize, I believe, Mr. Wilson. Thank you for being here, Senator.
Come on up, Elsie. Good evening, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Chairman Haney for allowing me the opportunity to speak this evening. I'm here because, as you know, for 4 county board members, this will be their last meeting. Gary Jury obviously expresses his opinion about that, but I just want to offer my congratulations and thank you for your dedication and service for all these years, for all those board members who will be stepping down. Eli Nicolosi, I certainly appreciate your efforts over the years to talk politics locally and state government-wise. I would appreciate that. Same with Gary Jury. Gary, you're my county board member, as you know. You always come across as someone who wants to get the job done versus worrying about partisan politics. And I'll never forget at the end of a parade in Lowe's Park a couple years ago, we were done the parade and you took my political sign and you took it to my car, which I thought was impressive. I may not be happy with your supporters, but I also appreciate that and showed that you were really cared about people. Ted Biondo, having worked within the media, always found you a credible source, as the media still currently does, and even in the political arena. When your arguments, when you have your arguments, they're loaded with facts, figures, and numbers, and they're always well-reasoned arguments. So I appreciate your service not only here in Winnebago County, but other government entities as well. So thank you all for your service. I understand Senator Severson and Representative Cabello offered recognitions as well and kind words a couple weeks ago. So if you don't mind, I certainly would echo those comments, but I want to spend my focus on Elsie Wilson to my right. Elsie Wilson is someone who really, truly cares about this community. You see him all over the place. You see him at business groundbreakings. He's there. You see him at different community events. He's there. It's just amazing. And all kinds of community events, especially those that involve veterans or help veterans. You know, Elsie is there time and again. He's also spent a lot of time talking to candidates, telling them where they need to go, showing the ropes, and making sure that they go to all the places across the community. And of course, one of his most publicized efforts in this community have been his editorials in the Rockford Register-Star. And a common, and I think a very important theme in those commentaries is the need for our community to become more inclusive, both in the private and public sectors. That a diverse workforce in the business place at all levels makes us a stronger and more prosperous community. So thank you for continuing with that message. Elsie is someone who supports and loves this community, but also is willing to take a stand and make sure that he challenges us to make sure that we're a better community. So not everybody's willing to do that. In this past Sunday's editorial, which hopefully is not your last one in the paper, Elsie, you said that my personal feeling is that I cannot give up. I have to help fight the fight. Elsie, I hope you keep fighting, and the community certainly needs you. So I'd like to present this presentation from the state of Illinois. Thank you very much.
First of all, I've got my notes here. I want to thank my wife, Regina Wilson. Please stand. And my other family members who are here, could you stand so people can see you? Two brothers and two grandkids and a daughter. Oh, I'm sorry. By the way, he's a member of Stevenson's County Board. I also would like to thank Steve for this recognition that you've given me, and to Frank, who had input at getting these recognitions, to Gary, to Ted, and myself. That took some doing. Thank you. It has been a pleasure to represent the people of Winnebago County, and especially the residents of District 14. It is always a pleasure to work along with Democrats and Republican caucuses of this county board. We have worked to get things done. I will miss the things we have been doing. I will miss doing the things that I really like to do on this current board that's helping people. I will still be an advocate, to answer your question, in this community to help make changes for the betterment of our lifestyles. As long as I have the strength, the will, and the passion. Thank you very much.
Stand here. Steve.
You want to come on up?
Steve up to.
Thanks for telling us what to do.
That's just like a woman. Tell her.
And just like you guys not to listen.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Thank you, Senator Stoutland. With that, we'll move to our next item, public comment. We do have 7 speakers this evening. I'll read the, as we ask Bruce Erickson to come on up, I'll read the disclaimer. Comments shall be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers may not address a zoning matter which is pending before the ZBA, zoning committee, or the county board. Personnel matters or pending or threatened litigation may not be addressed in open session. An individual may speak a maximum of 3 times per calendar year on the same topic. This prohibition shall include the repetition of the same topic and a statement of what is purported to be a different topic. Personal attacks or inappropriate language of any sort will not be tolerated. With that, I will turn things over to Mr. Erickson. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much. My name is Bruce Erickson, and this little guy is called Bella. We work with the 17th Judicial Circuit Therapy Dog Program. It's a program that we started 5 years ago. Last October, we started expanding. We now have 7 dog teams here. I think any of the judges that we have served in their courtrooms would tell you we not only help all the people that we were there intended to help, but we also help the morale of the judges, the staff, and the crew. everybody knows that there are going to be bad days, and it does happen. I'll read a little bit about some of the teams, what we do here real quick. With our 7 dog teams, so far this year, we have covered 131 visits to the courthouse with our 17 members. By the end of this year, we will probably hit at least 150. Now, when I say that, that is specific type of cases that we're actually here working with. Our goal is that by the end of next year, we want to try to be able to hit every day we have a therapy dog in the house. That's our goal. We started 4 years ago working with children that are subject to juvenile court, abuse and neglect proceedings, delinquency, who are victims of crimes or witnesses to crimes that are being called to testify in court proceedings. So if you can imagine, if you're a little kid, and it doesn't matter what age, but you got to sit up on a desk and the judge or somebody's going to be asking you questions. If you've got a therapy dog next to you, it doesn't matter if it's a big one or a little one, whatever they're happy with, we can provide. They are calm, they're able to testify, and that's what counts. The truth is going to come out. We also work with children that have been brought into court to testify in any proceedings in which custody or guardianship of the child is disputed. This is also very helpful. A year ago, we started with the adult victims of crimes or witnesses to crimes that are being called to testify in court proceedings. We will also work with them, being it may be domestic violence, any adults with intellectual, physical, mental disabilities that would interfere with their ability to meaningfully participate in court proceedings. We will also provide a dog for them too. So we do not rule out anybody. We have started working with the Veterans Court. I'm sure some of you know what the Veterans Court is. That's been working out fantastically well. We've also been working with CHIP Court, which is 17th Circuit Therapeutic Intervention Program. And that's also worked out fantastically well. So I have to honestly say, I think the little guys, even though it's not costing you anything.
We're about 3 minutes, sir. We're at about 3 minutes. Thank you very, very much.
Even though it's not costing you anything, it's a good program and it's working.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mayor Greg Jury. Mayor? Our next speaker is Jennifer Smith from River Bluff Nursing Home. Jennifer? Oh, there you are. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Okay, I'm nervous. Hi, my name is Jennifer Smith, and I've been a nursing supervisor at River Bluff for 21 years. I understand that fiscal considerations have brought the board to consider alternative solutions to the deficits in the county budget. I've been informed that the chairman may ask for a vote to put a referendum to sell River Bluff on the ballot as early as the spring. River Bluff does not operate at a profit. It is my understanding that few county health institutions do. Profitability is not the objective. Providing important services is. There are myriad reasons why we need to keep River Bluff in the county's domain, and I'll elucidate a few of the most compelling. Number one, the way that a community cares for the most vulnerable of its population speaks volumes about the priorities and health of that community. With River Bluff in the county domain, the residents of Winnebago County can be reassured that if they or a loved one are in need of skilled residential care, the local government has their back. If sacrifices need to be made, I feel that there is a moral imperative to protect the frail and instead turn our eyes to other more robust solutions. 2, someday, God willing, you will grow old. The people you love will become elderly and infirm. On that day, will you desire to be sent far from your community if you lack the funds for private care or deplete the financial assets reserved for that care? Will you want to send your loved ones away if you cannot provide the safe environment that they have come to require? These will most likely be your only options if the board votes to privatize River Bluff. Number 3, To the people presently living at River Bluff, it is their home. It is probably the last residence that they will ever inhabit. Privatizing River Bluff would inflict stress and hardship on people who do not deserve it. Profit-driven retirement homes often provide suboptimal care. Is that the direction Winnebago County representatives want to proceed down? I believe that you chose to participate in the government of our county out of civic duty and a desire to improve our community. Selling River Bluff would defeat both of those objectives. Number 4, River Bluff provides a large number of jobs in Winnebago County. The decision to sell would add to Winnebago's unemployment number and cause hardships to the many people who work there. 5, finally, we are a historic part of Rockford, Illinois. River Bluff has been an institution in Rockford for over 150 years. We have long been known for our healing and palliative care. We are an asset to the city of Rockford and Winnebago County. We are a physical demonstration of the compassion our local government has for its citizens. It would be a terrible loss for our community if the board decides to relinquish this historic healing establishment. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Jen Mason.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Masick, and I have been a Rockford resident my entire life. I've raised 4 kids here in this community and have served as an educator for our at-risk youth for over 20 years. The trauma and violence that plagues this community is an issue that must be addressed by someone who knows the community, understands the consequences of unprocessed trauma, and has experience addressing one of the greatest root causes of this trauma, domestic violence. I sincerely believe that Judge Rosemary Collins is that person. Judge Collins is a pioneer when it comes to domestic violence, trauma-informed care, and restorative practices. Judge Collins has dedicated a career to this community, making it her life's mission to bring awareness of the horrific and long-term consequences that domestic violence has on those who endure the abuse, witness it personally, and suffer the residual effects. She understands the effects traumatic experiences have on survivors, and she always treats them with dignity and respect, helping them find the justice that they deserve. Judge Collins is passionate about providing interventions and building a system to stop the cycle of abuse and trauma so that our families no longer suffer at the hands of an abuser, and our children have a chance to develop in homes that are safe and are free of violence. I have had the privilege to work with her to bring greater awareness to our schools and to develop a system to proactively support our students. Judge Collins' experience combating domestic violence does not end with her work in the courts. She has a proactive approach to secure funding for educational initiatives, Children's Safe Harbor, and our Family Justice Center. The mark that Judge Collins has left on the Winnebago County is indisputable, and we now have the opportunity for her work in this community to continue, and I am grateful. I believe that her experience, passion, and strong moral character will guide her in building a state's attorney's office that will provide the very best possible response to crime, family violence, and juvenile offenders in this community, a place where we deserve a leader like Judge Collins. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Our next speaker is Shelley Hutchison to speak to us about River Bluff. Shelley, thanks for being here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here tonight. I appreciate it. A few of the comments will probably be a little redundant after what Jennifer had said. Anyhow, the reason I'm here is because there is word that Chairman Haney will possibly be asking some of you in the near future to vote to sell River Bluff. as possible, or as early as the spring. We can't let this happen for several reasons. I've worked at River Bluff for over 25 years. Started as a CNA, then moved up to an LPN, got my RN, worked on a skilled Medicare unit, and now I'm a unit coordinator. As an RN, I can pretty much work where I want to. My options are wide open, but I choose to stay at River Bluff because I love the people that I work with and that I help take care of. So I'll just share a few more reasons why it's really important to keep River Bluff as a county-owned facility. So as Jennifer had said, we've served the citizens of Winnebago County for well over 150 years, and not just the elderly. I personally have taken care of many individuals as young as their early 20s who've had tragic accidents or just because of disease processes that brought them to the nursing home. You may think that tragedy may never strike you or your loved ones, but believe me, it does happen. Where will your loved one go if they've burned through all of their money, their savings, or they lose their insurance, or need complex care 24 hours a day? Healthcare is expensive and the money doesn't last forever. River Bluff is the only nursing home in the area that will accept residents that are Medicaid pending. No other place in town will take you without money up front if your Medicaid process is not complete. Most of our residents are on Medicaid. Other nursing homes in town have a few Medicaid beds, but not many. We frequently get referrals for residents in other nursing homes whose money has run out and they're now being asked to leave their home. It's heartbreaking, but it does happen a lot. Another thing I wanted to point out is that River Bluff only accepts residents that live in Winnebago County. We have a very diverse population at River Bluff. In the time that I've worked there, we've taken care of police officers, teachers, nurses, politicians, local business owners, Illinois Department of Public Health, the surveyors, their family members have been taken care of there. We've also had 167 veterans, and that's just in the past 25 years. River Bluff was founded in 1852. Think of how many people we've served in this community over the past 165 years. River Bluff is vital to this community. Do we make a profit? No. But neither does the police department or the fire department or the highway department. But they are all a necessity, as is River Bluff. Is there so little value placed on our elderly that we can just sell off their home to the highest bidder? We're not here to make a profit. We're here to serve the citizens of Winnebago County that have lived here, paid their taxes, and spent their hard-earned dollars here. This isn't the first time someone's tried to sell River Bluff, and I'm sure it's not going to be the last. I don't nearly have enough time to express everything I would like to, so I encourage you to come out to River Bluff, see what we're all about, talk to our residents, talk to our families, talk to our staff.
Thank you, ma'am. We're at 3 minutes.
Alrighty.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Shelley. Our next speaker is Paul Goddard. Paul.
Members of the County Board. I'm Paul Goddard. I'm a teacher and union leader by trade, and also a former prosecutor, both in Ogle County and here in Winnebago County. I'm here tonight because of the opportunity presented to you to choose a new state's attorney. You've had a strong pool of candidates in front of you, a number of whom I know professionally, and several I call friends. You have one candidate, however, who is providing you with a chance to move public policy and criminal justice in this county forward in profound ways. Over the last week, I've heard all sorts of political considerations and machinations about this selection process. That seems to be, everywhere I go, what people are talking about. The position of state's attorney, however, should involve more than that. Instead of political considerations, in selecting a state's attorney, the conversation must be about who has the judgment for the often grave decisions the office must make, who has the experience leading the community forward on social justice issues, who is a leader the dedicated professionals in the state's attorney's office will follow not out of positional authority, but out of hard-earned trust. Rose Collins is exactly that kind of leader. In terms of leading public policy forward, of serving all the citizens of Rockford and Winnebago County, of understanding a wide variety of people and perspectives, of advocating for those who often cannot advocate for themselves, Rose Collins is unmatched. For the benefit of Winnebago County citizens, please take the advantage Rose Collins' candidacy provides you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul. Our last speaker is Lorraine Logan. Lorraine.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My remarks are based on my 4 decades of assessing talent and determining role fit, both private and public sector experience and insight. From 13 years as a member of the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners for the City of Rockford, I understand what it is like to sit in your seat, making decisions of public impact. Overwhelmingly, I can report that when one is fortunate enough to have a candidate whose track record is replete with successes that speak directly to the known and perceived requirements of the role under consideration, you can and should feel comfortable in moving ahead with this candidate. I respectfully ask you to return Rosemary Collins to the office of the State's Attorney's Office, where she began her career. What do we know to be the critical success factors for a successful state's attorney? Broad experience and impact, collaboration, sensitivity, and communication, problem-solving skills, and staff development. Like me, you have directly experienced and appreciated Judge Collins' extensive body of work. You know her as an unfaltering advocate to equal access to justice for all. Understanding the integrity of our justice system is key to reinforcing public trust in our government. Her stated vision is the elimination of violence for our community. She foresees this as being possible through outreach to our community by both herself and the attorneys within her office. You know her as a collaborative leader who helps move our community forward through transparency and inclusion. She begins any project by bringing people to the conversation. She listens to their concerns. Her network of partners for success includes numerous public and private agencies, as well as formal and informal servant leaders from all walks of life. To team with Judge Collins is to find common ground to achieve a mutual good. This trait will enable her to inspire an effective team even in challenging times. She's known for team development and motivation and will develop new attorneys, one of today's effective retention tools. She consistently measures effectiveness and efficiency of practices and protocols, not allowing for stagnation and negative impact. You know her as an exceptionally well-informed. Her awareness has been honed by her vast service, public defender, state's attorney, associate judge.
We are at 3 minutes.
Thank you, I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all our speakers this evening, appreciate it. Our next item of business is new business. The chairman's nomination to fill the vacancy in the position of the Winnebago County State's Attorney. Just a comment, there's been a tremendous amount of discussion around this important topic, and I think that's a good thing. I think that's a tough thing, and we are very blessed as a community to have a total of 9 people come forward for the state's attorney position, 7 of which were interviewed. Like the county clerk interview process when Margie Mullins stepped down, we did the following things in that process and in this. Number one, we called for applications broadly and repeatedly so that we got the word out to anybody that was interested in the position. Number two, we did public interviews that were open and transparent to the community, and I believe the media attended all 7 interviews. The media, the public, county board members were all welcome to attend. The third thing is we took input from a multitude of stakeholders, from the Bar Association to Democrat leaders in the community to Republicans, to folks who don't identify whatsoever as political, to many, many people in the public safety continuum on all sides of it. With that, we came through a process. And I want to thank everybody for their attention and time in the community and also in this room. It is appreciated. And with that, and to that end, I would like to ask for a motion and a second to nominate Judge Rosemary Collins as the next state's attorney of Winnebago County. May I please have a motion? I have a motion by Mrs. Crosby. I have a second by Mr. Kelly. The item is now before the county board, and I would open it up for comments or questions. Seeing none, seeing no hands up, then I will turn things over to Clerk McCall for a roll call.
Mrs. Crosby.
Yes.
Mr. Fellers.
No.
Mr. Fiducia.
Yes.
Mr. Girl.
No.
Mrs. Goro.
No.
Mr. Hoffman.
No.
Mr. Jury.
No.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Mr. McDonald.
No.
Mr. Nicolosi.
No.
Mrs. Red.
No.
Mr. Salgado.
No.
Mr. Schultz.
No.
Mr. Tassoni.
No.
Mr. Webster.
No.
Mr. Westcott.
No.
Mr. Wilson.
No.
17 no, 3 yeses.
Okay. I'll ask everybody to be quiet in the gallery, please.
Point of order, point of order. Mr. Bianco's name was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Nicolosi.
I apologize. I'm sorry. Mr. Biondo.
Yes.
Mr. Booker.
No.
Mr. Boomer.
Okay. Thank you.
15. I'm sorry. 15 no, 5 yes.
Thank you very much. The motion fails. With that, I would move on, and I would like to bring forward a nomination for State's Attorney of Winnebago County. We have the nomination, allows us to make a second nomination this evening, and I believe with the vote count, I would entertain a motion to approve Marilyn Hyde Ross as the next Winnebago County State's Attorney. I have a motion by Mr. Hoffman and a second by Mrs. Red and Mr. Wilson and Mr. Goro and Mr. Fellers. With that, I would open it up, and if I miss Mr. Nicolosi, I apologize. We'll add Mr. Nicolosi on the second. Any discussion by board members? Yes, Mr. Fellers, then Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a difficult process, I think, for all of us. There was probably no right decision here. We have been blessed with some of the most talented judicial minds, frankly, probably in all of Illinois here in Winnebago County. And I want to thank Judge Collins for her efforts and her tenacity in this. Personally, for me, this was probably the most difficult decision I've ever had to reach as a county board member in my 2 years. I finally did something wise after talking to hundreds of people over the last 3 days. I called my minister. And fortunately, he was wiser than me and said he could not help. But he gave me the name of someone that did, Reverend Edward Copeland. And I had one question, and it was, is Marilyn Hyde Ross the person to advance social justice in this county? Is she the person that's going to stand up for all of those who face the inequities of our justice system, whether they be people of color, women who are abused, children, LGBTQ. And his answer was a resounding yes. We need to get better at this. There were a lot of people that were hurt in this capacity. We need to be better about these things. But I'm confident that we will make the right decision and approve Marilyn Height Ross.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fellers. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, my vote is not against Judge Collins. My vote is for Marilyn Height Ross and the recommendation of the Democratic Caucus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. I concur with Mr. Fellers. I've been on this board for a long time. I've never seen the problems and the things that we had with this issue. I think the process was wrong, and I made that statement the other night. I sat in this chair next to my Democratic colleague. 5 weeks ago, I told him, or 6 weeks ago, whatever it was, I told him, Joe, I will support whatever your caucus brings in. I did that out of respect for the Democratic Party and my colleagues. It wasn't a vote against Rosemary. It was a vote against the process which was done. You did not listen to the Democratic Caucus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Yes, Mr. Hoffman.
I want to thank everybody that voted in this. It was a very hard decision. I've known Judge Collins 30 years, maybe longer. I have all the respect in the world for her. It was a very difficult thing. It was heartbreaking to have to argue with either side, to have to fight with like some of my colleagues, to have to get in the dirt. It was miserable. I spoke to Mr. Haney today, and we kind of, well, we've been close. We probably cried at each other's shoulders. So it was a very tough thing. I'm glad it's over. Let's get this vote done and settle this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chairman. I made my vote in respect for my colleagues across the aisle, and I felt that we have, as Republicans, don't have a right to choose this because it is their vote, not ours. And because of the process the way it is, we went along with it. And with all the respect to my colleagues, thank you for all the hard work that you did.
Thank you very much, Mr. Westcott. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I only want to add to what Craig just said. I was appointed in 2004. My appointment was presented to the then chairman, Chris Cohn. Chris Cohn let the Democratic Caucus select a person, and that person happened to be me. In 2005, Angie Goro was appointed to this board by the Democratic Caucus, and the procedure was the same. The chairman was different. It was Scott Christensen. And now today we see Angie still here. The last person I want to talk about is Tim Neighbors. He was also appointed to this board by the Democratic Caucus to the chairman at the time, which was again Scott Christensen. And the Republicans all helped, and since I've been on this board, even if it's for one of theirs, we show the respect for each other. It's disrespectful when you don't respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Any other comments, questions by board members? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mr. Fellers?
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia?
No.
Mr. Girl?
Yes.
Mrs. Goro?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Jury?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
No.
Mr. Nicolosi?
Yes.
Mrs. Red?
Yes.
Mr. Salgado?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Sassoni?
Yes.
Mr. Webster?
Yes.
Mr. Westcott?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Biondo?
Yes.
Mr. Booker?
No.
Mr. Boomer? Mrs. Crosby?
Yes.
17 yes, 3 no.
We have a new state's attorney. Congratulations, Madam. Mr. Grohl.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to just express my gratitude for the people that did apply for this position. They were very, very qualified. This was one of the hardest decisions that we've had to make, but as a caucus, we stuck together, and as board, we stuck together, and that means a lot. And I appreciate the chairman for coming around finally and respecting the caucus's choice. Thank you, and thank you to my Republican colleagues for also respecting this process. It goes both ways, and we will remember this in the future. And I think the situation in Winnebago County will improve now. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grohl. Our next item of business, meeting minutes. May I please have a motion to approve the minutes from October 25th and lay over the minutes from November 8th. I have Mr. Fellers on the motion, and I have Mr. Jury on the second, and Mr. Wilson. Item is now before the board. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Announcements and communications, Clerk McCall.
The items listed below were received as correspondence.
Thank you very much. Next item of business, board member correspondence. Any board member correspondence? We'll go to Mr. Wilson for the very last time. Mr. Wilson. He's a regular in this part of the program.
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, along with myself, Ted, and Gary, would like to thank this board. They didn't ask me to do this, so I'm doing it on my own. For working together close to where we have, even though we didn't always agree. Thank you very much to this county board.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Wilson. I believe I have Mr. Webster is next, Mrs. Grohl, then Mr. Westcott. Mr. Webster.
Yes, thank you. This is kind of a follow-up to the comments that I made to all of you at our last board meeting concerning the lobbyist and UCCI both in that. And I think this is probably the last time I'll have to address the board about this. But at our last meeting, when I spoke on the issue and spoke about wasting 75,000 bucks on the guy, and the chairman's response was, we're not paying him anymore. And then I spoke some more on it. Once again, he said, we're not paying him anymore. So I think like 3 times he said, we're not paying him anymore. And I know that raised eyebrows on some of my board members, but I didn't articulate enough to explain to you so you understood it well enough. Because, in fact, we were bound to have to pay the man still. And the reason I say that to you is because he was hired by way of a resolution. And the resolution read that he would be paid through September of 2019. And so without having a resolution to get rid of the guy, it takes a resolution to break the resolution, okay? And that didn't happen, and so when I checked, he submitted a bill for October, and we paid him through October. And now, it brings to mind to me there that this new resolution, that thank goodness Gary's going to bring one in tonight for this. But the resolution reads that the contract is broken within 30 days after notification. So my question is, if we do the resolution tonight, are we still going to have to pay this man for November? Is he going to, or should we even get the money back from October? And then get, not have to get a bill in November. And I ask all these things because information was withheld from us from the very start on this. The guy was hired under questionable circumstances, and I want to be sure, I want to be rock solid sure on this before I ever speak on it again, that we are going to terminate the contract with this man this evening. We are not going to pay him any more money. And my only final questions were, do we get money back from this guy for October? Because I don't know when you told him that we weren't going to pay him anymore. And also, are we responsible to pay him now in November as well?
Thank you, Mr. Webster. So I will speak to this very briefly. Yes, Mrs. Crosby.
Can we cover this when it comes up on the agenda?
Be happy to.
Thank you.
Mrs. Squirrel.
I just have one question, and that question is for Elsie. I want to know who's taking his place with the veterans. Do we have someone in this room who's going to be going with him and following up and giving us all the information that Elsie Wilson has always given us? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel, and I saw him point at Mr. McDonald, so we'll be having that conversation, I'm sure. Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Westcott, did I have a hand up over here? Yeah. I apologize. Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank three men that I have admired for a lot of years. Gary, Jerry, and I have known each other for a lot of years. Well, that's how I'll say with that. Ted Biondo, I worked with at Sunsgrant and on school board issues over the years. And Mr. Wilson, just three great people. And I want to thank you for your service to this community. And I hope we'll see you again real soon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your words, Mr. Westcott. Any other comments by board members? Yes, Mr. Hoffman.
I would be remiss if I didn't say goodbye to my old buddy over here. And my other buddy sitting up front. I'm gonna miss you guys a lot, and I can't say nothing, Mr. B. So thank you guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Hoffman. Any other comments by board members? Seeing none, we will move on to the chairman's report. I'll just speak very briefly about the process. Let's talk about the process when we appoint elected officials. For the first time in many years, we had two elected officials leave their post early. Probably will not happen for a very, very long time, but it did happen twice in 1 year. Talking to the chief judge and the state's attorney, when we had the county clerk opening, we communicated up front the following couple things. We're going to take applications, have open interviews. There's going to be input from a multitude of areas. There's going to be a recommendation after that that'll go on the agenda for the board's final approval. That was the exact same process that we went through this time. Had we not had that process for the county clerk, Tiana McCall would not be sitting to my right or left. I'm very excited that we have an opportunity where we had a multitude of input. There is room in the conversation for the chairman to make a recommendation, and I absolutely respect the final decision of this board this evening. I will continue to engage and be part of the discussion in a respectful way. That is the goal we will all be part of that discussion, so I do appreciate that. Next item of business, County Administrator's Report. Carla, do you have anything?
No, I just want to remind everybody that we do not have any meetings next week. We'll meet for committees the week of the 3rd and have one board meeting December 13th in December.
Okay, thank you very much, Carla. Next item of business, Finance Committee. Mr. Biondo. Oh, I apologize. Can I do one item before I bring up Mr. Biondo? May I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion by Mr. Feller, second by Mrs. Gorel. Any discussion on the consent agenda before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. Biondo, Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This isn't my fault, okay? So I'm going to try to go through it as fast as I can. The committee report, I'm going to try to, what I'd like to do, the votes on all of these were, there was a 5-2 vote, a 5-1, 7 6-0 votes, and 1 8-0 vote. So I'm going to try to, the committee, and we had multiple meetings, dual meetings, where we had other groups with us for some of these. I'm going to, if there isn't any direct questions, I'm going to read all of them but one, because one of the people doesn't want to vote no on everything. He only wants to vote no on this one. So I'm going to try to go through that. And I'm sorry, but it's the fastest I can figure out. We have a resolution. I might have to do the resolutions by themselves. We have a resolution authorizing the increase in the salary of the Winnebago County Public Defender, and a resolution authorizing the County Board Chairman to extend the term of agreements to the inmate mental health. Both of these were unanimous votes, so I would like to move to approve those two resolutions. That's item 2 and item 11.
We have a motion by Mr. Biondo to approve item 2 and 11, the resolution regarding the increase in the salary of the Winnebago County Public Defender, and the resolution regarding the extension of the term of the agreement for the provision for inmate medical health services. May I please have a second? Second by Mr. Gorel, second by, I saw another hand up, Mr. Jury, Mr. Boomer. Any discussion by the board? Any questions? Again, where I have items 2 and 11 on the finance agenda before the board. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We passed 2 and 11. Mr. Biondo.
All right, I'd like to read in budget amendments for items 3 through 6 and 8 through 10, which is the rental housing. These were all pretty much the same. I'm leaving 7 out. So it's budget for the 41 to rental housing fund, 42 for recorder fund, Falar Technologies, and 43 is circuit clerk retro pay, and also State Justice Institute, public defender salary increase. The 11 for 2019 now is assessed for justice grants. And last here would be 2019-12 for the State Justice Institute grant to be laid over. That's the reading.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biondo.
And I'd like to then suspend the rules on items 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, and 10.
We have a motion to suspend the rules on items 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, and 10. May I have a second to suspend? Second by Mr. Jury, second by Mr. Crosby, second by Mr. Girl. Item is now before the board. A yes vote is to suspend the rules. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. We've suspended the rules for 3 through 6, 8 through 10. Mr. Biondo.
I'd therefore like to move those budget amendments.
We have a motion by Mr. Biondo on items 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10. May I have a second? Mr. Wilson, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Jury. Items are before the board for any discussion or questions. Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. Biondo.
Okay, I'd like to read in item number 7, budget amendment 2019-009, circuit clerk, AFSCME contract increases to be laid over.
Thank you.
And then I'd like to try to suspend the rules for that amendment, budget amendment.
We have a motion by Mr. Biondo to suspend the rules for item 7, the circuit clerk AFSCME contract. May I have a second, Mr. Gurl? Item is now before the board. A yes vote would allow us to suspend the rules and vote this evening. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. Mr. Schultz?
Is this on the suspension?
Yes, that's suspension.
A yes vote is to suspend the rules, so all those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We've suspended the rules. Thank you very much. Mr. Biondo.
I'd like to move to approve that budget amendment.
Got a motion to approve item 7. Before the county board is the AFSCME contract, second by Mr. Gurl, second by Mr. Westcott. Item is now before the board. That's the AFSCME contract. Any discussion on the AFSCME contract? Yes, sir. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The circuit clerk has a stellar history of managing its budget. They are one of the best that we have in the county, and I'm very appreciative of the good work that they have done. They have taken cut after cut. They've done it with grace. They've found a way to make it work. When others complained, when others spent beyond their budget, the circuit clerk's office stayed within their budget. So I want to start by recognizing the good work that they do and that they have done. I do want to say that this will add to the general fund deficit that we approved as part of the 2019 budget. At the last meeting, we approved an additional position for the Sheriff's Department, which will provide an incremental deficit to the one that we already approved in the original budget. I'm pleading with my fellow board members, draw the line somewhere, please. And let's have some consistency across the departments. This is not about one area, this is about our entire budget. We can't afford the deficit we've already approved. We need to stop incremental budget amendments that dig that hole deeper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schultz. The item before the board is item 7, the AFSCME contract. Any other discussion or questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed?
No.
I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mr. Fiducia?
No.
Mr. Gurl?
Yes.
Mrs. Gurl?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Jury?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Nicolosi?
Yes.
Mrs. Red?
Yes.
Mr. Salgado?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
No.
Mr. Tassoni?
Yes.
Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster?
Mr. Webster?
I can't hear you.
Sorry.
No. Mr. Westcott?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Biondo?
Yes.
Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer? Mrs. Crosby?
No.
Mr. Fellers?
Yes.
$14 yes, 6 no.
Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Biondo.
Before I say, I'd like to thank all of you for my time on the Winnebago County Board, for your support as chairman of this committee, and I'll miss you all. I'll still read about you, I'm sure. But if you need help on anything, give me a call, and I'll be available if it's financial. I'm not good at some of the others. But I just, again, like one request, remember Jamie Salgado when you come up for the finance chair. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biondo. Thank you, Mr. Biondo. Next item of business, zoning committee, Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. As long as I got the speaker here, I'll take an opportunity to thank Ted, myself, I don't think there's anyone that's more respected for the work that he's done for the county, for this whole entire community, actually. Remember years ago, I had a discussion with Ted, and I can't remember what it was, but something we were rumbling about politically. And Ted says, you know, I'm not really a politician, Jim. He said, you know, I deal with these numbers, and I'm just trying to save people some money. And he was absolutely right. He's held true to that statement, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, Ted. Anyways, your zoning committee has 2 items on the agenda tonight. The first is to be laid over Z1518. It's a map amendment for an agricultural priority district change to A2 from ag, and it's by DG Solar. And this came to us with a recommendation of denial from the Zoning Board of Appeals and likewise from the Zoning Committee. So that's in for first reading for layover.
Thank you.
Thank you. Number 2, we have a resolution that's to be voted on. The resolution directing the Zoning Board of Appeals to conduct a public hearing on certain Unified Development Ordinance amendments regarding vacation rentals. And this came out of committee with unanimous approval, 7-zip. And with that, I would move to approve this and send it back to ZBA. Or down to ZBA, sorry.
So we have a resolution, motion by Mr. Webster on the resolution directing the Zoning Board of Appeals to conduct a public hearing on certain Unified Development Ordinance agreements related to vacation rentals. May I have a second? Mr. Fellers and Mr. Salgado. Item is now before the board. Any discussion? Yes, Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to add one thing to this. Normally, some of these things that come through zoning are either very straightforward or fairly boring. This was news to me. If you're familiar with Airbnb, I don't know if everyone is here. According to our zoning code, having an Airbnb in the county of Winnebago is a zoning violation. You cannot rent out your house on any sort of limited or long-term basis or short-term basis without a variance right now, without some sort of special, without a permit. That's primarily what these discussions are going to be about. And if you've got some interest in this, I would recommend you attend the ZBA hearing on this. Of course, you know, often the economy and markets and industry shifts faster than governments do, and I think this is one of those cases where billion-dollar industry has come up around rental properties, and we need to be on top of this to make sure that we have the right rules in place to support this. These represent opportunity of people bringing money into the county, and we need to have the proper rules and ordinances to cover for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fellers. Any other questions, comments?
I might just follow up on what Mr. Fellers is saying in reference to the UDO, that's Unified Development Ordinance, that we adopted just a couple of years ago. A lot of money was spent on that, a lot of time was spent on that, over a year to get there. That replaced the old 2010 plan we had that was full of holes. It was about worthless, actually. So at any rate, back then on the 2010 plan, I can remember there was about every other month a change had to come in to amend that because it wasn't accommodating things. It was just a failed statement. So that UDO is it's a working document, a living document. Like anything living, it needs a little attention once in a while. But this is a testament to how well this UDO was done, that we've been working with this for the past few years now, and we've only had to have a couple of amendments to it. And it's because something new comes along that wasn't even thought of at that time. And so this is part and parcel of servicing our taxpayers, our community. So I look forward to this going to the ZBA, coming back to zoning committee, and then finally to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. The item before the board is the resolution regarding the public hearing. Oh, we got to take the vote. We are very optimistic on the outcome. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Webster.
Thank you. I didn't think we'd have to rumble on this.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Next item of business, Economic Development Committee, Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chairman. We have one item before us, a resolution for infrastructure contributions for the I-90 and Riverside Boulevard area. to the city of Buzz Park using host fees, and I so move.
We have a motion by Mr. Westcott regarding a resolution regarding infrastructure contribution to the I-90 Riverside Boulevard area to Loves Park using host fees. May I have a second? Mr. Wilson. Item is now, and Mr. Jury, item is now before the board. Yes, Mrs. Gorel.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, Mrs. Gorel.
Thank you, Chairman. As I was looking at this, I have some really mixed feelings about it. I know right now that with our highway department, we're really low on funds, and we should be actually supporting our highway department, which is infrastructure, roads, and so forth. I would like to make an amendment that on the $1,680,000 be cut in half to $840,000 for 4 years, and the balance of that is put into the highway department.
So we have a motion by Mrs. Gorel to reduce the $1.7 million request by 50%, and then the balance would be directed to the highway department. That is the motion that for Mrs. Gorel. Is there a second? I have a second by Mr. Tassoni. The item is now before the board. The motion in the second includes cutting the request in half to $840,000. It is now before the board. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a Finance Committee meeting tonight, so was not able to stay for the entire session of the Economic Development Committee, but I got wind of a comment that was made as to an update on the status of our host fee fund, and I'm wondering if it's possible to get a comment on that by Carla.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Schultz. Carla, would you mind giving an update?
Yeah, we're in the process of closing out fiscal year 18, but right now we have roughly a $2 million fund balance in the host fee fund. We will be carrying over $792,000 of allocations from fiscal year 18 that we'll be bringing forward to be reallocated. Just for your information, we have previously approved multi-year commitments of $28 million that will go through fiscal year 2034. Friday, we learned that the landfill had been overpaying us since 2008. They are estimating that total overpayment to be $3.3 million. We'll have to work with them if that in fact was overpaid as to how we're going to repay that balance. Because they had been overpaying us, they're not yet able to provide us a revenue estimate for fiscal year 2019. I also just want to mention that host fees are limited. They don't go on forever. We're estimating now that they will end in fiscal year 2033, but our commitments go through fiscal year 2034. So we need to be conscious of managing our host fee dollars and making sure that we're not overcommitting ourselves.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions, comments? The item before the board is the motion, is Mrs. Gorel's motion and second related to cutting the request from 1.7 million to approximately 840,000. Mr. Girl and Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just wondering if Angie's amendment for the highway department would also be a 4-year commitment or one lump sum. I think the 4-year commitment would be something that I could live with on that, because we don't know exactly what will happen with the situation that Carla is set upon. So I would like to see the 4-year commitment on both sides, and I would imagine that was her intent, but I just wanted to clarify that, if that was.
So we'll clarify with Mrs. Grohl that this is intended to be a 4-year commitment. Is that correct, Mrs. Grohl? Yes, she's confirmed that. So the motion in the second is to reduce the ask by 50%, the other half going to the highway over a 4-year period. Thank you very much, Mr. Grohl. Mr. Salgado, I believe, was next. Mr. Salgado.
Yeah, I just wanted, same along those lines with Mr. Girl, just a little bit more explanation on the 840 and then the remaining portion to the highway. Just wanted to get some history, feedback a little bit, how those numbers came about and the rationale under that. The second piece of it, I just wanted to know, like, with all due respect to those individuals that brought this, what's the impact of the contract potentially? You know, the 1.7, obviously they won't get the money, but what's at risk here? Just wanted to get information on that. I'm not saying that I'm against this motion or anything like that, just would like some information because it does have some impacts on the other side.
Thank you. I would go to Carla, or if anybody from Loves Park could speak to impact, any discussion related to the impact of this ask.
I don't know the impact on Loves Park.
Okay, Mr. Galuzzo. Yeah, that's fine.
You know, we made large commitments, obviously, to get this project moving forward, not only for the industrial, but also the other commercial. We believe this project has a positive economic gain for the county. What I hear you talking about is a larger policy issue about using host fees for internal operations, not necessarily economic development. And I think just that being thrown in at the 11th hour, I wish it wouldn't happen here. And I think you guys should go back and work on that in the committee for future deals. But for this deal, it's really been percolating since March and April. I'd like it to move forward without an amendment with regard to this matter. And you guys can kind of work on that internal policy issue down the road.
Follow up, Mr. Salgado.
Yeah, so the question that I have though is like, if this happens, you know, what's going to happen? Are you guys going to be able to continue? Obviously, we hear Costco is going to come regardless, but you're asking for infrastructure. What's I guess what I'm saying is like, what's your plan B? I guess sort of, and can you what's going to be the impact on this project going forward?
I mean, thank you for asking. We actually had to make firm commitments because since we were working on these since April and May, the city had to make firm commitments because when this first started coming out in the paper, before we had heard that the administration was going to be against it, we received communication from the commercial development that was coming that they didn't want to get in the middle of a political infighting. So we made the firm commitment. The city's committed to far more than this infrastructure dollar amount, and obviously denial of it would be a detriment to what the city can do. I mean, this is money that the city's going to utilize for infrastructure. If it had to come up with other money, we'd have to look at our internal finances to see where and how we can come up with it. And I'm sure there's going to be other cuts in place that would likely follow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Galuzzo and Mr. Salgado. Follow up by I'll go to Mr. Tassoni and then I'll come back. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In part, my support Secretary Angie's amendment there is because since my 10 years on this board, serving consistently on the Public Works Committee, I have asked and begged and wanted a commitment of host fee dollars on a consecutive basis to go to the Highway Department, and it's yet to happen. And that is why I support Mrs. Grove's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Carla?
We actually have committed some of the host fee dollars to the highway fund annually for the last few years.
One-time commitments?
On an annual basis. It's 2017 and 2018, and the plan is to in the future as well. We're just holding off on our capital plan until we know what the revenue estimates is and what the repayment is going to look like.
Follow up, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you. Carla, can you tell me, do we have, till 2033, our host fee funds are assumed to come to us. Do we have a commitment till 2033 for funds to go to the Highway Department?
No, currently in the...
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Biondo.
Yes, I think Carla talked about a lot of things here about the fact that these people are asking for money back from our fund, and the fact that we don't even have enough to cover the ones that we've already committed up through 2033 or 34. The fact that the host fees, we are going to be spending money we don't even have, and we may not even get it. So, and we may lose what we have. So I think that's really risky. I don't want us to use host fees for internal things. I think the attorney for the Loves Park made a good point, is the fact that That's not what they're asking for here. And this actually takes another step. It isn't just to spend money on this project for Costco, but it's to settle or to change how we're using host fees for operations, and I'm against that 1,000%.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biondo. Just, I'll go to Mr. Girl, or no, you'll hold off on that. I'm going to go to Mrs. Gorel on a follow-up, and then I do have a follow-up for Carla. Mrs. Gorel.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, we also have money restrictions too, and we cannot just continue to give money. Sharing this with you, I don't have a problem. I would have to vote no on this tonight if we can't come to some type of an agreement that we share that money rather than give it all to one entity. We have to start looking again, like Mr. Biondo says, that we have a future and we want to make sure we meet the future and that we have the monies to meet it. So that's exactly how I feel about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Obviously, on Friday, we had a curveball thrown at us. The projection coming from the landfill was late. Normally, we have it by this time of the year, and it was late, and I kept asking Carla, you know, when's it coming, when's it coming? And then they said they called and they wanted to meet, and they said there was an issue with this past payment for the last year. And then they said they were looking back, they're under new management. Then they said they were having their controller go backwards. We've just begun that discussion. They dropped a bit of a bomb on us Friday. We're dropping a bit of a bomb on you today. At the same time, it is something we're going to work through, and I'm sure we're going to be very aggressive in those conversations with the landfill. We're not happy about this error on their side, but at the same time, there's work to be done on that front. It is not concluded. It's just the beginning of the conversation. That is news to us, the amount of money that was shared. That is not at all in any way a game, anything sideways with this separate conversation. The Loves Park deal, the discussion which has been going on for some time, this is in no way meant to in any way disrespect their ask. My concerns, I think Costco is wonderful. I'm on record on that. I think it's good for our community. My personal concerns with Costco is this. We want them. I'm looking still for one county in the state of Illinois who is investing in retail-related projects and the things around it, including infrastructure. It does not mean it's not a great thing. We are very blessed, and they've done a wonderful job putting this together. That is part of what our research has shown. Carla, could you speak to the current commitments we've made on East Riverside, just for the record, if that's okay? And I know I have a hand up or two, and I will get to that, and I apologize.
Okay. I would like to defer to Joe on the highway portion of it, but in November 2013, the county imposed a 2% hotel motel tax. All of that money since 2014 has been directed to the Reclaiming First project. From 2014 to 2018, that has totaled $4.4 million. The hotel tax will continue to go to the Reclaiming First project until the bonds are paid off in January of 2035. Additionally, the county committed $7 million to the Reclaiming First initiative out of the host fee fund. That's one of the commitments that comprises that $28 million. The final payment on that commitment will be made in fiscal year 2034. And then Joe has some information on some infrastructure.
Some of you will remember back in 2004, I believe it was, that the county started this Build Winnebago County Partnership Project, and program, I should say, where we went in and did infrastructure improvements throughout Winnebago County. One of those was the $27.5 million project on East Riverside and Paladin Parkway, where we rebuilt Riverside, the 4-lane road, put in a new interchange at Riverside and I-39, I-90, and then constructed Paladin Parkway. Our share of those costs were $4.4 million. We had multiple partners, including Loves Park out there. The tollway being the largest one, about $10 million, but they're getting their money back.
Winnebago County agreed as part of that to take over jurisdiction of Riverside, Pelham Parkway from Riverside North to Worth Road. And we have plans to extend that north to actually 173 or even Belvedere Road in the future as part of a program to help economic development for all of our partners in Winnebago County. And then we also agreed to move our salt storage facility, which was out there at the interchange, and we have now moved it to Rock Cut State Park. So that was part of helping make that area attractive to development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, there's been a lot of talk about this is for Costco. This is more for Love's Park and them to grow. They are part of the county. Their growth is essential to our overall growth. If one community struggles, we all struggle. Let me remind the board that if you think that we shouldn't support retail, I want you to take a good look at Prairieville. We invested $30 million. If you drive up and down that, it's basically all retail. If you look at Myers, we gave investments for tax abatements and for other infrastructure related to Myers, not directly to Myers. So this isn't a question that we're helping Costco. We are helping one of our partners, Love's Park. I would hope that we would help Rockton, Roscoe, anyone that came to us that needed our help. And this not only will solidify that area as a prime spot for future development, but it also enhances the county as a whole. And that's what we have to look at. Will this 1.7 be reinvested back into the community? It will through sales tax. I have absolute belief that Costco will bring in other people, other retail establishments. And whether those jobs, if you want to argue $13, $14, it's low paying, I guarantee you to go through any temp agency and see if you can get 13, 14 bucks an hour to start off with health insurance, with great benefits, paid time off, vacation time, sick time. I guarantee you cannot. Costco would be a great partner, as Love's Park has been. So it's not just the question of should we support retail. I think we should support any kind of economic development that will grow this community. All I've heard is people complain about property taxes. Why do we pay so much? Because we cannot lure big companies like this that can ease that burden. We are all overburdened with taxes, and the more we push people away, the less likely they're coming here in the future. So what we do now, I think, is very important to the future of this community and this county. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gurl. And I'm sorry, I think I'm missing somebody. I think I have Mrs. Crosby, and I do have... Oh, Mrs. Red, were you next?
Yeah.
Mr. Fellers, I apologize.
Okay. I'm going to speak against the amendment. Not that I don't think it's meritorious, but my concern is we've got this $3.3 million overpay out there, and we don't know where we're going to end up. So I'm going to vote against the amendment just based on that.
Thank you very much, and I apologize if I'm going on a sequence again. Mr. Fellers, then Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've yet to fully come to a conclusion on this. I agree with Ms. Crosby here that we don't know what our host fee revenue looks like next year. And for pure fiscal accountability, I'm very uncomfortable sending any additional money out of host fee funds until we get a full accounting of exactly what next year looks like. Also, I would stress that this board should possibly consider looking at how we fund these items. Items like this that we expect to bring in additional tax dollars, right? If we're going to give up 1.7 for infrastructure improvements, knowing that that's going to grow tax base in that area in terms of sales tax and other revenues, we should really be looking at using the additional revenue from those taxes to repay that to the host fee fund. Right? If we're going to spend this money, let's get some money. Let's do it the way we would do it here if they're borrowing money, on their personal finances or on their business finances. If I've got a deficit spend, or if I've got to give a little incentive, put some money out there, as I get more money back in, I'm going to replenish that fund. That's how we keep the host fee fund going, not just from 2034, but to 2035 and beyond, as we start using the money we're getting from sales tax to put into the host fee fund so we can pay back these commitments that we make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fellers. Any other discussion? Yeah, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to be clear, I'm going to abstain on all votes tonight because of my personal relationship with the developer. However, I do want to kick my 2 cents worth. Joe mentioned about we've already invested out there. I think it shows Rockford Mercy. I'm sure that was part of their decision to move out there because we have done a great job. I think that area is going to continue to grow and become an asset for the county. Investing in host fees is something that's going to help us have sales tax and increase our property values, you know, from farmland to something that we could have a better tax base out of. I think these are good things in general. However, I'll have to abstain for tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. I see a few more hands pop up. The only thing I would add that I would say is, compared to a year and a half ago, we didn't have as much of an economic development pipeline that we do now. There are projects in the pipeline that may or may not happen, but if they do, that the dollars from host fee and or the county may make the difference in them coming or not. If not but for this investment, there's a couple of deals. Project Alpha has been one that's been talked about. With a new board coming in and with the new dollars that we may owe, it is worth considering so that we use this money the most strategic way possible. In no way is that meant to disrespect our partners or the project itself. It is not. I'm sorry, I have somebody, Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. I agree with Mr. Gore. You know, you open your eyes around here. It doesn't take you long to remember that the Red Barn over here, we spent thousands of dollars of host fees. The Burpee Museum, $1,000 of host fees to help our government agency that's almost on the brink of bankruptcy. And we just passed another one, alleviating tax dollars. This is going to bring in sales tax dollars. You talk about doing something. If it brings $800,000 in, why don't you earmark $400,000 a year to go to the highway department? No, we have done millions of dollars for helping communities. So I just want to point that out. This is going to bring money back in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jury. Follow up, Mr. Gorel, then Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. Just a point of order. It was an amendment on the floor, and that discussion should be centered around that amendment, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you.
We're discussing way more than this amendment.
The motion is to cut the request in half from 1.7 million to about 840,000. That is the motion, or that's the item before the board right now. I know I had a hand up here. Mr. Wilson, I apologize. We have a motion by Mr. Wilson to call the question and a second by Mr. Nicolosi. So the item is right now a yes vote on this would allow us to call the question and take the vote on the motion and second to amend the motion. All those in favor of calling the question signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed to calling the question? Motion passes unanimously. We've called the question. So the motion before the board is to amend, not to approve, but to amend the motion, which would reduce the ask from $1.7 million down to $840,000 over 4 years, with half, the saved half going to Highway Department. Any other, we've called the question, so with that I will ask the clerk to call the roll, please. The motion is to amend.
Mr. Girl,
Respectively, no.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Jury,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
No.
Mr. McDonald,
Abstain.
Mr. Nicolosi,
No.
Mrs. Red,
No.
Mr. Salgado,
No.
Mr. Schultz,
No.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster,
Yes.
Mr. Westcott,
No.
Mr. Wilson,
No.
Mr. Biondo,
No.
Mr. Booker,
No.
Mr. Boomer, Mrs. Crosby,
No.
Mr. Fellers,
No.
Mr. Fiducia?
No.
Mr. Jury?
No.
$15 no, 4 yes, 1 abstain.
So the motion to amend fails. The item before the board is the $1.7 million request by Loves Park. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to my previous comment on accountability here and understanding what the balance of our host fee fund looks like as we move into fiscal year 19. I would like to motion to lay this over until we can get those numbers from the county administrator.
We have a motion to lay over the item, second by Mr. Boomer and Mrs. Crosby. The motion is to lay over the item, and it is now before the board. Any discussion on the layover, Mr. Salgado?
Yeah, just a question for you. I do strongly agree as well as looking at the host fees and everything. But I just want to know, like, you know, if there's an urgency for this to get passed. I don't want to essentially cause any ripple effects. That's the only thing. I completely understand. You know, we have to look at the host fees funds. We have to look at the policies and procedures. I know we have a breakdown of infrastructure and different things, community, 30%. I'd like more clarification as well as projects like this come through, you know, how often can we decide, what's the process? I know that when applications go out for host fee funds for the community or businesses or any agencies out there, so I'd like more clarification as well in that with the policies and procedures that we look at and more, and also look at how much our responsibility is. Now we're here 30, you know, and up into 33, but more than anything, before we take a vote, I just would like to know, you know, if there's any ripple effects laying this over. If there isn't, then let's do it. If not, if there is some timing issues here, then we could vote that way. That's all I ask.
Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Westcott.
We started this back in March this year, and here it is November. We're finally getting around to bringing this to the floor. So I'm hoping we'll just get it done.
Thank you, Mr. Westcott. Mr. Wilson, I'll come back to you. Or, I'm sorry, let's address Mr. Salgado's question directly about impact. Well, there's impact in 2 ways. I'll let Loves Park speak to that, if that's okay. I think we've identified where we're at and created that landscape, so we know the impact of making a decision and what remains not clear at this point. I think we're clear on that. My understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, in talking recently with Mayor Jury, is my understanding Costco's coming. That is a separate issue. If I'm mistaken in any way, please tell me in the back of the room here, just so I'm clear on what this means, since there's a direct question.
Here's the impact. Greg, you need to be on the mic for the report from the county clerk. They really want to report.
Like Fred said, we've been working on this since March. The board, nothing against you, but it's been delayed. We have contracts with people that we got to start putting money out in December, so we need to get this through, and we don't need to go through another process with the new board. You guys as board members give a new board a budget, you know, so I mean, it's not uncommon. So we cannot wait any longer. We need to get this done. Our contracts, we got to start paying people in December. And I think everybody knows the benefit this brings. We're just asking you to be a good partner with us. That's all we're saying.
Thank you very much, Mayor Jury. Any other discussion? Yes, Mr. Webster?
Yeah, thank you. Getting back to that overpayment for just a second, is there some schedule of a payback on this, or regular schedule?
Carla, I'll go to you, but not at this time.
Not at this time, and we're not even sure what we're going to do about the overpayment, if we're going to maybe request that an audit be done to ensure that the overpayment's correct. I mean, we have a lot of work to do on it. I'm sure we can reach an agreement to pay it over time. If we do have to repay it, we just don't know, because we found out on Friday.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Mr. Wilson on follow-up.
Thank you very much. I'd like to just expand on what Fred brought up, and that's this. In the past, and I don't mean 30 years ago, I mean recent past, if you will, 5 years or less, whenever there was things that were economically involving the committee, we knew at an early time. This time around, we didn't get that. And I'm hoping that in the future, that whenever there's something that is of economic interest for this county, that it would be brought to the Economic Development Committee so that they at least can maybe talk to board members. That's why a lot of them don't know. And sometimes I don't know. We need to start doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any other comments? The item before the board is to lay over the item, the $1.7 million ask by Loves Park. Seeing none, a yes vote would be to lay over the item, a no vote would not, and the item would be back before the board. With that, I will ask the clerk to call the roll. Again, a yes vote lays the item over to the new board. A no vote would keep the item before the board this evening. Clerk will call.
Mrs. Goro.
I'm going to pass right now.
Mr. Hoffman. No. Mr. Jury.
No.
Mr. Kelly.
No.
Mr. McDonald.
No.
Mr. Nicolosi.
No.
Mrs. Red.
No.
Mr. Salgado.
No.
Mr. Schultz.
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni.
Yes.
Mr. Webster.
No.
Mr. Westcott.
No.
Mr. Wilson.
No.
Mr. Biondo.
No.
Mr. Booker.
No.
Mr. Boomer. Mrs. Crosby.
Yes.
Mr. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia.
Yes.
Mr. Girl.
No.
Mrs. Goro.
Yes.
Okay.
13 no, 7 yes.
So the motion to lay over has failed. The item before the board this evening is the $1.7 million ask by Loves Park. We talked about reducing that. That motion failed. Talked about laying that over. That motion failed. So the item is the original motion that was brought before the board this evening. Any other discussion by board members? Again, a yes vote is to approve that, approve the motion. A no vote would end that discussion. Yes, Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I very much would like to approve this, but until we have an accounting of our OSB funds, it would be irresponsible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fellers. Any other comments by board members? Mrs. Red.
Thank you, Chairman. It's hard for me to believe that for 10 years, we've been overpaid by the fund. And I don't see anything in writing. Where is that?
Mr. Kurlikas.
This was read, there is an agreement in writing, and it has exclusions for certain types of wastes that should not have been counted in the host fees. They have been improperly counted in the host fees, which really is in violation of the agreement, and that's why it resulted in these overpayments from the landfill company to the county over the last 10 years.
Thank you. That was,
Mrs. Red.
thank you. That was not brought to us that way. It was not brought to us that there was, we didn't see the contract, so we're just going on words, something someone said, and that happened on Friday. But this started in '08.
Right, the contract was approved by the board.
When was that contract approved? So we're discussing a contract, just so we're clear on the board.
Right.
That contract at that time, I would hope ran through the county board. I would assume it ran through the county board, but we're not sharing that with you in this most recent instance. This came to our attention Friday, and we are sending them back to look at solutions on our behalf, and we'll be very aggressive in those discussions. But thank you, I appreciate your question. Mrs. Red on follow-up.
Just another comment, but it came up tonight in our meeting, in our economic development meeting, that we had been overpaid for maybe 10 years.
And we found that out on Friday and shared it with you Tuesday evening. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I was in the meeting as well, and it just came across as very vague that we were just kind of nonchalantly notified with no evidence. Mr. Kalinkas gave more detailed explanation to it.
Yes, thank you. We are sharing, I believe, Carla, the information that we have at this time. As more information becomes available, we will be sharing it. But I believe, Carla, am I mistaken? Is there anything else we can get out to the board on this matter that would be relevant?
I mean, there's a spreadsheet that details it, but it doesn't provide a lot of information.
Okay, thank you very much. I have Mr. Nicolosi and then Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Chairman. So we just found out about this on Friday. Is this something that we could potentially challenge, or is it pretty much black and white, we owe this much money?
We are in the process of very early on, since we found out on Friday, we are going to have a lot of discussions. I think Mr. Nicolosi raises a good point. This is a beginning of a discussion, not the end of it. We did not anticipate, we knew there was an issue in the most recent payment. On Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock, we found out that they are projecting when they sent their controller back. They did not have a ton of documentation. They're still digging into this, but that was the number they shared with us. Just to put that on the record, it is the beginning of the discussion, not at all the end of it, and we'll absolutely keep you, we'll keep in direct communication. I think Mr. Schultz and then Mr. Fellers. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to express my appreciation to Mr. McDonald for the integrity that he's expressing by stating that he has a conflict of interest on this vote. And where we have close relatives who are impacted by a decision on an issue that comes before the county board, that would also represent a conflict of interest. I'm wondering if conflict of interest, Mr. Kalinkas, is something that a board member is exclusively responsible to state, to claim, or if there is an apparent conflict of interest in terms of either a known associate relationship, if that can be called out by some other member of the board or by the chairman or by yourself.
Anything legally you could add to that?
I don't think it would be something that the state's attorney's office would call out unless it was something that was overtly illegal in some way, shape, or form. Having said that, you as county board members have the absolute right to address any issue that you feel is relevant to any action that you take. So, I mean, I don't think it would be something that our office would normally just seek that we would take a position on unless we were asked to. Unless we were asked to, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. I think I saw the next hand up was Mr. Jury.
Well, I hope we get this done before I expire, but unfortunately, there is no conflict of interest. There would be a conflict of interest if there was monetary compensation. There is no conflict of interest. It's a county issue, a county board, and if there was, I would have abstained. There's no reason for me to abstain. I represent the people of Love's Park. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jury. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to chime in on this. I've got some feelings on this, but that's a vibrant area out there, and I'm hoping that everything's going to work out good. But I have to agree with Mr. Fellers with this. If we're having a cash flow problem with the host fees, I think it would be irresponsible to vote for something like this. But on the other hand, I don't want to see something like this go away. So I think we made a dire mistake by not laying this thing over and going and talking about it more. Because I don't want to do this to our partner, Love's Park. But if we've got a cash flow problem with the host fees now, I don't think it's responsible for us to approve this.
I think, just to be clear, when we're using words like cash flow problem, we want to be very clear on what the reality is. But I just want to make sure we're clear on the board floor about what our balance was, what the most recent issue is, and the fact that we're still waiting on projections. We are going to meet the obligations. There's every intention, our current obligations on multi-year commitments that'll be made, that we've made, that will be met. And we do have the $2 million reserve. Just to follow up, Mr. Fiducia.
Respectfully, I guess what I'm trying to say is, if I'm wrong with saying cash flow, where my worries is this: I'm going to be 77 years old when that gets paid off. Okay, I did the math. If you stop and think about that. I don't want to put that on another board for making a bad decision. So if we, I would seriously like to keep this going, but I can't support it right now the way it sits.
So we have right now, the motion before the board is the approval of the original amendment, the $1.7 million for Loves Park. I saw the next hand up was Mr. Webster, I believe. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, thank you. I think this issue has been brought up before about these commitments, and I don't recall the answer to it. When we do these, is there some language in the contract that says something to the effect there that if we're broke, we can't be held under the gun to pay them, you know? I guess I'm asking.
I think in some of the agreements, it does address whether the host fees are not sufficient.
Is that in this contract as well?
No, not in this one. If the project doesn't occur, then they would have to repay it, but there's nothing if the host fees were not sufficient.
Well, perhaps there should be. Maybe there would be some tension in the room. I don't know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. The item before the board is a $1.7 million resolution from Loves Park. I'll go back to Mr. Gurl a third time, if that's okay. Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Chairman. This will be my final comment. The landfill has been a great partner with this county board, even in the past ownership, and I would have to truly believe that this new ownership would also have that kind of relationship with this board and would allow the board to repay any money owed over a certain amount of time to where it would have a direct impact on our commitments. So I would have to think that the landfill would honor that and would work with us as a good partner as we have with them. So I would, this is not going to break us. We're not going to have to tear down BMO tomorrow because we have to pay some money back. We have paid money back from New Milford that we have owed them. We are still going strong, and I might remind some people that we do have commitments coming up in the near future that will be dropping off the host fees, that will be allowing more money to be used for economic development and infrastructure, the things that the host fees were intended to be used for. So that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gurl. Any other comments by board members? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to call the roll. A yes vote is to approve the original motion, the 1.7 million. The no vote would obviously decline that. Before we go to the vote, just to break this out, the 1.7 million, can we break that out, Carla? How much of it is this year, just so we're clear on the floor? The 1.7 million is how much up in the first year?
I'll defer to Chris on that.
I see, go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been recently changed, and it's April 30th of 2019 would be $280,000 to be paid on April 30th or before for the next 6 years, equal amount, $280,000. So it's actually $1,680,000.
280 for 6 years.
Correct.
Equal payments. Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Fellers.
I'm sorry to have to ask this again, but if the initial payment's not going until April 30th, why don't we have another 2 weeks to do this? I mean, you said you guys told us you had to have this today. But if your first payment's not coming until April 30th, can't we have 2 weeks to figure out what's going on in the host fee fund?
Would anybody speak to that? Seeing none, we'll go ahead. If there's no other comments by board members, no other comments from administration, The item before the board is the $1.7 million for Loves Park. A yes vote would pass it. A no vote would obviously decline it. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mr. Hoffman.
Yes.
Mr. Jury.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
No.
Mr. McDonald.
Abstain.
Mr. Nicolosi.
Yes.
Mrs. Red.
Yes.
Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz.
No.
Mr. Tassoni.
Yes.
Mr. Webster.
Yes.
Mr. Westcott.
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Absolutely.
Mr. Biondo. Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Boomer. Mrs. Crosby.
No.
Mr. Fellers.
No.
Mr. Fiducia.
No.
Mr. Girl.
Yes.
Mrs. Gore.
No.
One abstain, 8 no, 11 yes.
Motion passes. Thank you very much. Next item of business administration, or actually I'll go back to Mr. Westcott. Sorry about that.
I am completed with my report.
Thank you very much. Next item of business, Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. Your Operation and Administrative Committee has two resolutions before you this evening. And the first one is approving a collective bargaining agreement with ASME Local 31, Local 473, representing employees of the Office of Circuit Clerk of Winnebago County. And I move for its adoption, and I also would like to speak to it.
Yes, sir. We have a motion by Mr. Jury on the approval of the collective bargaining agreement for ASME Council 31 for the circuit clerk. I have a second. Mr. Hoffman. Item is now before the board. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. I would like to just add to what Mr. Schultz said about Tom Klein's office and the wonderful job they do in managing their budget. If we had everyone, and I'm going to say this, everyone manage the money like you do, we would not be trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel. Tom, thank you. And also, it's been an honor to work with you over the years. I appreciate your friendship and what you've done for the county. Thank you. Next resolution is a resolution terminating the agreement of Illinois government representation by Niccolo and Dart. And I move for it. Oh, excuse me. I'm ready to get out of here because, you know.
The resolution before the board is to approve the ASME contract for Council 31. Any remaining questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Jury.
Sorry for the rush, but I think we kind of fell asleep with the Loves Park thing. Next, a resolution terminating the agreement with Illinois government represented by Niccolo and Dart, LLC. I move for its adoption, and I'd like to speak to this.
We have a resolution, a motion by Mr. Jury on the termination of the of Niccolo and Dart. I got a second by Mr. Webster. The item is now before the board. Mr. Jury.
I move for its adoption.
Yep, we have it. A motion, a second. The item is now before the board. You wanted to speak to it, sir?
Yes. The reason for this resolution is I have to go to Mr. Webster. He brought to my attention last meeting that this was not done. I want to remind everybody that the chairman of the county board does not have the authority to nullify anything the board has done. Maybe he didn't know that, but
excuse me, Mr. Jury.
This nullifies the contract. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Very well aware of that. Very well aware of the fact that in Late September, as the budget played out, I did reach out to Mr. Nicolay and made it very clear that we had, for budget considerations, wanted to put things on hold, and we made that every effort. Yes, sir, Mr. Salgado.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question. If we cancel this, do we have anything in plan to potentially get a lobbyist or a process, considering that, you know, we have new leadership down in Springfield coming on board? Just wanted to think about that. I understand we're looking to cancel this and push it through. Just wanted to know if there's a game plan, or if the legislative, if we have a committee that it's going to be looking into that, what direction we're heading into. We need to think about those things further down the line.
So if the board wants to dot i's, cross t's, and officially end this contract, that would not stop us from bringing back something for consideration in the future. It would be, I think, a mistake to not say we need a long-term strategy related to Springfield with the supermajority and the dominance of a particular party in Springfield, and with a changing governor, and with the fact that you are going to get a ton of information related to the overall state of our highway system in the state of Illinois. There's there's going to be a lot of pressure around a number of issues with the new governor, new administration, a push for a capital bill. We do need to have a long-term strategy. We are absolutely going to be bringing forward things for your consideration. The putting it on hold is what we did. At the same time, the board has every right to end the contract. There's no problem whatsoever. I know some love it, some don't like it, some are indifferent to it, but we absolutely need to have a long-term strategy. To be clear, we cannot host fee our way out of our infrastructure challenges. Mr. Vanderwerth is going to give some very troubling information, and we are going to understand very clearly that the way through some of our long-term infrastructure challenges is to have the strategy at the state and national level. Yes, Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that you've listed that this is on hold, that we're not spending any money on this right now. To your point, though, given how difficult it was to get the first lobbyist through this county board and the long process it took there, I would hope that everyone seriously considers leaving this contract in place, because it isn't actually costing us any money. Should things move quickly down in Springfield, we want someone who represents Winnebago County's interests, not every county's interests, fighting for the infrastructure dollars that we're going to need in this county. If we have to go spin this all up again and make arguments on whether or not we get this guy or this guy and we go through the interview process, I don't want to miss out on this. So we're not hurt by leaving this contract in place. We're not spending the money, and if something does happen quickly and we need to move rapidly, we at least have one person under contract. Now, if it happens in 6 months from now that nothing's happening, that we're not going to be a while, and we want to review who represents us in Springfield, I would be 100% for that. But let's not get rid of this, because this is a dart we might need to pull out of our pocket at a moment's notice.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. Mr. Webster.
With all due respect, that's almost laughable what you just said there, Mr. Fellers. We do have
Mr. Webster, let's not go there.
We do have representation, and it's in the way of our elected representatives in Springfield. We do get updates regularly from the group that I finally convinced us to join. We have not gotten anything now for over a year. We had one time when this lobbyist came to town. It was after a time that I spoke about it, and so then a meeting was arranged to get the guy to come to town. He came to town one time and just talked about some, I don't know, a few things there, but we get regular, routine updates from UCCI. The one recently that I spoke to you about was an update, had something to do with the circuit clerk and the way monies are garnered and the way they're dispersed. And when I talked to Mr. Klein about it, I asked him, and he said, you know what? Tom Lawson has been working on this diligently. I would appreciate, when we get done with this discussion, if you would give Tom a moment to update us about what he has done that will benefit the county. And that news didn't come from our hired gun down there, so to speak, at $5,000 a month. It came free from UCCI.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster.
Did we?
Oh, I'm sorry, are you still talking? I apologize.
Yes, I'm sorry. Have we, he got paid, no, the statement was that we're not paying him. And I'm sorry, but you doubled down on that a minute ago there, Dan, but apparently we are
On the
still.
board floor, it's Mr. Fellers.
Wow, thank you. Anyways, so going to that end there, we paid him in October. And I'm asking you now, by way of ending this with this resolution, that puts the kibosh on it altogether. Do we have to pay him now, once again, another $5,000 for nothing?
Well, first of all, it's an inaccurate statement to say nothing. Number two is I gave the gentleman the heads up in September when the budget realities ahead of our budget adoption became clear, and then the extra 30 days is the 30-day out. It is on hold. There is no dollars being expended for November. Yes, they send the invoice ahead, but it has been made very clear to Nicolay and Dart that we're just putting it on hold. It's not, there's no future billing until we take it off of hold and there's budget for it. To be honest with you, one thing I would say though is there's two types of things related to a legislative agenda. One is to be reactive, is to get updates. So for example, some of our financial associations provide updates through their associations. Carla gets a good one. UCCI has been a wonderful addition. It's a great coalition of our smaller rural counties. It is a great, I think, investment of the few $1,000s we make in it, but it is much different. It is much different than having a lobbyist. The extension of the River Edge tax credit and what the River Edge tax credit has done for this river community over the last few years, and us being down fighting for that and aligning with other entities related to the River Edge tax credit has been worth millions of dollars to this community. With the discussion of a casino, which I know there's the best chance we've had at a casino in a very long time, the idea of perhaps recalibrating around that, the county has a very specific interest, even alongside some of our other municipal partners. At this time, it is on hold. That's all that it is. At the end of the day, either way, that's fine. We do have a new board coming in. And so any decisions we make tonight, we are tying our next board to. At the same time, I don't know that it's a huge deal either way. We are going to engage in Springfield. There's going to be requests through the host fee in the future. And we have put that on hold because of other considerations, but we do need to circle back at that. We are going to have to maximize our available dollars we can get from Springfield. Any other questions before I go back to Mr. Webster one more time? Mrs. Crosby.
I would like to call the question.
We have Mrs. Crosby's made a motion to call the question, and I see a second. Yes, and I go to Mr. Kurlinkus. We have a motion to call the question. I have a second by Mr. Biondo. So we have a motion and a second to call the question. We did have a hand up. I don't want to be discourteous, but at the same time, we have a motion and a second. Okay, we do need 14 votes to call the question and end discussion. Clerk McCall, I ask you to call the roll. This is simply to call the question and discussion.
Mr. Jury.
Pass.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Nicolosi.
Pass.
Mrs. Redd.
Yes.
Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz.
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni.
No.
Mr. Webster.
No.
Mr. Westcott.
Pass.
Mr. Wilson.
Yes.
Mr. Biondo.
Yes.
Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Boomer. Mrs. Crosby.
Yes.
Mr. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia.
Yes.
Mr. Girl.
No.
Mrs. Goro. Mr. Hoffman.
Yes, please.
Mr. Jury?
No.
Mr. Nicolosi?
No.
14 yes. Mr. Westcott? No. 6 no.
Okay, motion passes. We will call the question and vote on this item. The item is to terminate the agreement with Nicolay Dart. With that, I will ask the clerk to call the roll. A yes vote would terminate the contract.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Nicolosi?
Yes.
Mrs. Redd? Mr. Salgado?
No.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni?
Yes.
Mr. Webster?
Yes.
Mr. Westcott?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Biondo?
Yes.
Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer? Mrs. Crosby? Mr. Fellers?
No.
Mr. Fiducia?
Yes.
Mr. Girl?
Yes.
Mrs. Goro?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Jury?
Yes.
Yes.
16 yes, 4 no.
Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Jury.
Thank you. That ends our report. I would like to take this time, first of all, to thank my wife and family for allowing me to serve the number of years I have on the county board. I have made many friends and some enemies, but you know, when you're in this business, you have to vote your conscience, and it's the way you see it. But I will always remember the friendships that we've had. Elsie, you go back a long time. Ted, you go back a long time. Dorothy, and the newcomers, Jaime, and all the newcomers. It's been a pleasure to serve this county. In fact, I was trying to do a little figuring the
Let's
other
give
day.
Mr. Jury the floor, please.
Yeah, I was trying to do a little figuring the other day. I put about 31,000 miles on my car coming back and forth to meetings. I think I rode the elevator maybe 3,000 times. And I was countless of committee meetings, but it's been worth it. I think the county's better today than when it was when I first came. I want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart. And Ted, now we can get going. I won't stay here too much longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Next item of business, Public Works Committee, Mr. Kelly. Oh, related to his efforts? Okay, we'll come back to that.
First resolution this evening is for award of a bid for maintenance of traffic signals in the county highway system and the appropriation of motor fuel tax funds for same. And I move its adoption.
We got a motion by Mr. Kelly on item 2 under the Public Works Committee, the bid on maintenance for traffic signals. Got a second by Mr. Wilson. Item is now before the board. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Kelly.
Our second resolution is authorizing the execution of an annual engineering services agreement with Willett Hoffman and Associates to provide bridge permit analysis of various county, city, and township bridge structures, and I move its adoption.
We got a motion by Mr. Kelly on the resolution authorizing the execution of the engineering agreement with Willett Hoffman and Associates. May I have a second? May I have a second, please? Second by Mr. Hoffman. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Kelly.
That concludes our report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Fiducia, Public Safety.
No report.
Thank you very much. Unfinished business. I do know Mr. Webster wanted to mention to Tom Klein, to Mr. Klein, just a quick 1-minute update. Anything else we could maybe push to committee on the item he mentioned?
Yeah, just a quick update. What started as House Bill 4594 related to fines and fees has now moved to Public Act 19087. I am on the Illinois Supreme Court Statutory Task Force to help guide legislation as it relates to fines and fees for our area. When the House bill started, we were at about $2,000 net, or $2 million, I'm sorry, negative. We have worked very hard with many different organizations, Illinois State Police, Let's Be, Victims Fund, advocates, to try and get us back to a neutral position. We feel like we're in a neutral position now, so there are going to be major changes to fines and fees starting July 1st of 2019. They have originally set it with an 18-month sunset, but is now, there is trailer legislation that is moving that to 30 months. The biggest thing that we have negated at this point was originally we have a new fee waiver process for criminal fines and fees. It does not relate to traffic or DUI, only for misdemeanors and felonies. Very difficult to estimate that impact on a county. And knowing that we will have some impact, what we have done is we pushed through legislation to be able to add other assessments to people who do not choose to pay their fines and fees. So we have found through Winnebago County and DuPage, working very strongly with some of these agencies to find a backdoor to recoup some of those costs that we know we're going to lose on the front end. We don't have a real good idea of where we're going to end the trailer legislation. We do know that on a bi-weekly basis, I meet with the Administrative Office of Illinois Courts. We have a committee of DuPage County, Winnebago County, DeKalb, and Will, who are working very closely on watching trailer legislation on a daily basis. The Circuit Clerks Organization works very close with many different lobbyists that may be out there that could guide legislation that could affect our fines and fees. Eventually what I'll be doing is I'll be coming in as we get closer and we have a better idea on the trailer legislation. I'll be working with, or Dave, on rewriting the ordinance that relates to fines and fees for everything that we're doing in the court system. Winnebago County has taken the burden of writing that for the state of Illinois. So the ordinance that I bring to you guys to pass, I will also be sharing with the other 101 counties to bring to their county boards. It will be very detailed, but it will be built on estimates. I've been working very closely with Carla to let her know what we have coming at this point, but that's kind of where we're at.
Thank you very much, Mr. Klein, followed by Mr. Webster.
Thank you. Thank you, that's Mr. Lawson.
Mr. Lawson, I'm sorry, Mr. Lawson.
I want to thank Mr. Lawson for bringing that information to us. After I talked to Tom, I knew this was some good stuff that we had to hear. You didn't hear it from your hired gun either, you heard it from one of our hired guns.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Mr. Jurgen.
Thank you. Tom, I talked to Mr. Klein and I was shocked at the amount of money that the circuit clerk paid to the state of Illinois. It's only $16,000. I think that's a lot cheaper than what we were paying.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and not directed towards Mr. Lawson this comment, but before we adjourn, I just wanted to say thank you to Mr. Jury, Mr. Biondo, and who else? Mr. Nicolosi for their time and commitment to this board. And I'll see who else is the best dressed guy in the room as well, sorry. But I just want to say that, you know, no interruptions, please. But, you know, in my time on this board, you know, a lot of my ideas have been shot down. I've supported a lot of other ideas. And I think what makes this world unique, this board unique, this county, is that we all have differences and we bring forth our ideas. And what makes it great is we all don't agree on everything. If we did, it wouldn't be no fun. I just want to wish you guys well and say thanks for this opportunity to be with them.
So, thank you. Let's get on. Thank you, Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Grohl.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to echo my colleague, Mr. Tassoni, and wish every one of you the best. It has been my pleasure to be a part of this board and work with every one of you, not just the ones that are leaving, but everyone that is staying. Mr. Biondo has been an insight of knowledge. I've learned many things from him. We might not agreed every time, but I tell you what, I do respect the man. He has given so much, just like everyone else has, to this community, so I wish him the best.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gurl. We got Mr. Hoffman, then Mr. Westcott. Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, I want to thank Eli for everything he's done for this board. He's been a great friend, great comrade, and I want to thank the three old Eagles here for the 300 years of experience they brought to us.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say good, let's send Jerry out with his last.
Motion to adjourn and seconded by Mrs. Crosby. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Have a good evening. Have a good evening.
Can we ever call the question on last time?